So I've decided to take part in the Game Maker's Toolkit Game Jam, where I'd have 48 hours to make a video game from scratch. So I woke up at 6 to discover the theme Join Together. After a little bit of brainstorming, I came up with the idea of controlling two separate characters with the same buttons. Right after opening an empty project, I began like a professional by immediately opening up Google. I then spent like an hour figuring out how to set up basic controls. The main crux of this game is that the player controls both characters with the same buttons. However, the characters move a little differently from one another, creating exciting gameplay. Of course, we need a game, which means we need enemies for the player to avoid. These little red things spawn a little bit off the screen and head straight towards the player. I haven't got the collision worked out yet, but that won't be very difficult. Okay, in hindsight, that didn't actually take as long as I thought it had. Collision's usually an absolute pain. But now we've got enemies on both sides of the screen. This is my minimum viable product. We have stationary obstacles on the left and moving obstacles on the right. I could go on and on about the symbolism of the movement and the stillness and life and love. I want to give the player a way to move only one character while keeping the other one still, so I'm creating a cross-shaped wall in the center of the left screen. This allows a skilled player to lock the left character in place while moving the right character. As you can see, my amazing art skills are being used to their best ability. Of course, getting the collision to work requires a complete overhaul of the movement system. And now everything is working perfectly. Currently, it's very easy to survive for a long time without getting hit, just by staying near the middle, so I need to encourage the player to move around the screen. Therefore, I'm introducing a scoring system where the player must collect tokens in order to build up a score. The tokens are positioned randomly throughout the world, and collecting these tokens is the main objective of the game. Of course, the player needs to know what the score is. I used a system where the player's potential score always counts up, but is never officially added to their total score until the player collects a token. After cleaning the UI up, the score was displayed like this. You'll notice that everything is working correctly and that the numbers look especially good. This is, after all, how numbers are supposed to look. This particular bug took an hour to fix. I finished the day by adding a rudimentary pause screen. I was quite happy with my progress so far, but I knew there was still plenty to go. I still needed a title screen, game over screen, graphics need to look less terrible, audio, a title. The main task for today was graphics. I needed to make everything look pretty, and for that I needed a pixel art editor. Finding a good editor turned out to be a rather difficult process. I started with Pix 2D, which worked fine until I realized that everything you export comes with a watermark. I then tried Pixlr, which worked okay, but lacked a few features which I would have found useful. I then tried GraphX2, which didn't work very well on a high definition monitor. And finally, I downloaded GIMP. It was far more heavy duty than I wanted, but I was confident it would work well. And it did work well, but I wouldn't describe the process as simple or easy. Around this time I began to build a game over screen. I used the font Lesotho Beach by Checkered Ink for the game's text. It then took me half an hour to figure out how to make the game over screen match the background of the previous screen. In fact, the game still needed a new look. I decided to randomly generate the background color each time the game is played. I made it always be a very light color. Well, I've delayed it long enough and now it's time to make some art. Firstly, I need to fix the wall, which looks terrible right now. I also want to make the obstacles look scarier. They need to immediately convey their danger to the player, so the player instantly knows that they better stay away. Let's make the score token more inviting as well. And finally, let's add some lighting. Notice that the color of the light doesn't actually match the color that I'm trying to set it to. I have no clue why this is a thing. Of course, it is at this point that my video capture software quietly stops working, so we've got hours of progress which we're just not showing. In the meantime, I edited the player sprite and the moving enemy sprite. I gave it a little spotlight and everything. I added code to make the enemy rotate towards the player, figured I'd show off this cool function which I derived using good old trial and error. I made some quick music, fill in the silence. And I came up with a title, or two titles. I enjoyed the aspect of playing 2 separate games at once, so I made the title reflect that by literally being 2 titles. And that was pretty much it. I submitted it to itch.io and then I went to bed. I'm not gonna pretend like it was a race to finish on time. I submitted it with like 8 hours to go. I had a good time. It was my first ever game jam, also the first game I've ever released. You know, good stuff. Make sure to check the game out. I've left a link in the description.